Welcome to
4Kids Flashback. Oh, hi. Didn't see you there. Welcome to another episode of 4Kids Flashback. I'm Tara Sands, and I'm joined by my co-host...
Steve. I thought I thought you'd be like, hey, Steve.
I know. Well, that's what I've normally done. We're figuring out these intro outros, you guys. Bear with us.
The complete authentic experience of learning how to do a podcast.
Yeah, well, you know what? I realized that we haven't been introducing ourselves at the top of every episode, but maybe we should. So, yeah, all right. Well, we'll see. We'll mix it up for you guys.
I'll give it a shot.
Mixing it up. That is the name of a Fighting Food On song. Mixing it up, mixing it. No, all right. Too soon.
Don't worry. One person will appreciate that reference.
Speaking of that, though, I noticed you said that the Fighting Food On's DVD was no longer available.
For now, yeah. I don't know who was just like, don't worry, I got you covered. But yeah, Discotheque released that series years and years ago, and I
bought it. I have one of the few copies of it. So
I think you would of all the people, yeah, you should have bought it. I remember seeing it. I'm like, what use is that to me?
Right.
And then the
I don't remember why. There was a reason why I bought it, and I don't watch myself, but I think I knew that would probably be the only copy of it I would ever have if I ever did want to see it. But I don't like watching myself, so I will never. It's the plastic is still on the DVD case.
But there you have it archived.
I have it. If I ever need to learn how to cook, I will watch that show. Or if I ever want to see food fight, I will watch that show.
I'm sure it covered the educational television requirement of the Fox box back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you wonder if, there's so many rules, again, we've spoken about children's television. I wonder if there are rules about kids, using the stove, because I feel like that's a weird lesson. You don't want a kid to think, oh, yeah, I'm just allowed to go cook, because that's heat and fire. Those are dangerous things. Why are those any less offensive than some of the other things that were edited out?
Yeah, especially because I know, with kids' television, something can't be a weapon that can easily be recreated at home. So
right. Well, on that note...
One day, we're going to deep dive into Fighting Food On someday. We're just going to...
We need to do... Maybe we'll do a watch-along or something. I don't know how that works, but we'll learn.
We'll figure something out, yeah.
You guys, we have an interview coming up here with Paul Taylor, who was... he was a translator and localization person at 4Kids for a bunch of years. His entry into the company starts with him doing missionary work. Now, I could have done a whole podcast just about religion and missionary work with him, and I could tell he had great stories, but that is a different podcast. So yeah, this is a fun interview. Steve, do you want to add anything before we let Paul talk?
Yeah, it might not be, I don't want to use the term household name, but probably not one of the names you might immediately think of with 4Kids, but definitely an important part in those early Pokémon days. So it is, it was a very fascinating interview.
Yeah, and someone who, spoke Japanese and knew a lot about the Japanese culture, and his understanding of, oh wow, we do have to change this stuff for an American audience. Again, which became controversial in many ways, but as someone who did love Japan and the Japanese culture, he did understand that this is how we get this on American television and introduce children to these shows. So I like that point of view. And
well said.
Here's Paul. Hello. Today, Steve and I are here talking to Paul Taylor. Paul worked as the localization manager at 4Kids. I would explain that to you, but I think he's going to do a better job of explaining what that job entails. So thank you so much for being with us, Paul.
Yeah, thank you. That's, I had a lot of titles. That was probably one of them at some point. But just put simply, I was the translator. So I would get the Japanese scripts and kind of in some instances sort of just transliterate, tell people what's going on. And it was, I might try and wax creative here and there, but it was often a pretty crude translation I would hand over to the writers. Like I think you spoke with Mike Hagney and Norman and some of those other guys who would then.
So let's go back a tiny little bit. Obviously, you're bilingual. Do you speak more than English and Japanese? And how did you learn Japanese?
Oh, for sure. I speak, Southern California Spanish, which is pretty transactional. I wish I was better, but I'm not. So it's pretty much just Japanese. And I grew up in the country in a Mormon town. And as you may know, they like to send their boys around the world to knock on doors and stuff. So I got to do that for a couple of years. And got converted to Japanese atheism, and learned a little Japanese. So.
Wait, you were a missionary who became a Japanese atheist?
Well, I think that the school of sort of logic, non-theistic logic that I ran into with people there kind of sunk in more so than anything I had to say sunk in for folks there. Yeah.
Wow.
Was this on a trip there, you were saying?
Yeah. So the Mormon Church does like these 2-year missions. They send mostly young people around to spread the word, I guess.
So how long did it take you to learn the language? It's not an easy language to learn. I mean, immersion is the way to do it, but how long before you were fluent and could actually I'm assuming you read kanji and all of that.
Yeah. Well, I was fortunate. I was in a little turkey town in central Utah, but the college there had a Japanese program, so I managed to get a couple years of Japanese in before I did the Mormon thing. And the Mormon Church, to their credit, they have a pretty impressive language program. You won't hear me say many glowing things about that organization, but they really teach language well. So yeah, when I hit the ground, I really didn't make sense, I don't think, and really couldn't understand a lot. But within a couple of months, I was able to kind of get along.
I spent a week there this year, and I learned one word that I said everywhere I went. I just said, gomen, 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 which means sorry, because I just was walking into people everywhere I went. And, just getting used to walking on the other side of the city streets was complicated. So what you did is very impressive.
Well, at least I was kind of, what you were doing was being very polite and kind of fitting in. And I was sort of the opposite, just, bothering people who didn't terribly want to be bothered with.
So how did you get the job at 4Kids? So that was around 89 you started working there?
98. So
sorry, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
I can rephrase that. I inverted the numbers. You started working there around 98. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. In fact, so 98 also coincides with the Winter Games. And I was actually in an exchange program at the university that's located in the town that hosted the Winter Games. So, they needed people who were bilingual. I ended up running around with some camera crews. And then, one morning, I think I had translated a note for someone whose wife was allergic to fish. And it said, it was like, she can't have fish. So I wrote this card that said, this woman will die on your premises if she eats fish. Or I don't know, something ridiculous. And so he came in and he was super grateful to me. And Norman was sitting next to me and he said, oh, you translate. Hey, want to translate this thing? And I was like, I've never heard of that. And he was like, are you kidding? Like, it's the only thing happening in Japan right now. And I had to look around. I was like, oh yeah, there's a Pokemon thing. But yeah, it was completely new to me. So
were you still living in Japan at the time?
I was finishing a semester of study abroad. So that completed. I went home. I think I still had a semester actually at college to finish my degree. And I started translating some scripts for them while I was finishing up school, and then ended up moving to the city.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. So I guess the question that we've been asking people, because we're trying to figure out who was the kind of liaison between the Japanese Pokemon team and the 4Kids office. So were you also helping with that kind of translation?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Or just scripts?
Okay. No, it was pretty fun with Pokemon in particular. With some of the other shows, it was much more, we had a few people on staff, but yeah, with Pokemon, I got to be pretty central, and it was fun. It was a lot of fun. But yeah, so I certainly did the scripts, but there was a constant back and forth that was, both about business details and contract details, but also occasionally plot details and issues around the localization as well.
That's definitely a big question that that
Mhm.
people have. So localization, some people will say it's Americanization, or it's making it
Mhm.
palatable for an American audience.
Mhm.
Um, how much of that were you doing a direct translation? I think, people, purists get upset when things change, but
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
obviously we were doing a show for children, so there were things that we had to change. Um,
Yeah.
were you involved in helping with that stuff, or was yours more a direct translation of the material you got?
Yeah, what I tried to deliver was something that gave a direct translation of everything that was there, pretty much as it was, and then as much as possible, the cultural context and the explanation, knowing that sometimes there were jokes, there were things that just weren't, they were gonna have to be completely rewritten or whatever. But yeah, essentially,
Right.
I think that the four kids definitely decided to make it feel comfortable to a Western audience, and I they definitely reached a bigger audience before, because of that. I don't know if it was the right decision or the wrong decision, but
Yeah, whatever they did, we always say that it was, well, I say, sorry, that it was a gateway to anime for a lot of people. Regardless
Mhm.
of how they feel about it, we meet these hardcore anime fans now at conventions, and that was what got them into it. They might have never seen it otherwise.
Mhm.
You were in Japan, you had access to it if you had wanted it.
Right, right, right.
So, yeah, Michael said he would often, like when he was trying to write jokes on the shows, like I'm sure the writers were very dependent on you to say, okay, how explain this joke that makes no sense to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there was a fair bit of that, and I think, but when I look at the first season, it was very much like that. It was great, and I mean, not that there was a bad season, but like I had a lot of fun because we were really kind of figuring out, how are we going to take this thing from this one context to a really different one and make it still work. And I think a lot of the things really come across as like a true kind of translation of what was there originally, and some other things probably come out a little bit different. But so there was a lot of discovery, and that was really fun. In season 3, 4, I think Michael probably, he knew what was going on. He was just, oh, this is a crazy Japanese joke. I think I kind of get it. I'm going to do this.
Well, Michael, we were talking about this in his interview. Often we'd be getting pages as we were recording the episode. So what's interesting to me is that you were probably in Japan at this point. This was early season 1. I had no idea that the translator was in Japan, so
Mhm.
Michael might have been waiting to talk to you at a certain time, and we would get
Listen.
faxes of the script, like page by
Mhm.
page as we were working.
I think so. I was in California then. I think, I was in the
Okay.
States, but just narrowly. But yeah, I remember a lot of like fax machines as well, sort of. And I don't know if this is the instance that you're talking about. I remember I was going on vacation somewhere, and I got this call. I was like, "We need this now." I was on the road in somewhere in Northern California, and I had to go buy a fax machine. So that may have been how that ended up on your desk. I don't know.
Wow. That's a poke emergency is what we would have
Exactly.
called that.
Exactly.
You worked on Pokemon for a while. Did you go on to work on other shows at 4Kids after Pokemon?
I did. So I left at one point, but I worked on, I mean, let's see, like One Piece and Yu-Gi-Oh and Kirby. I think Kirby had to be my favorite, honestly. I really love that.
Aw,
Foodons was, did you do any work
fighting
on Kirby?
foodons.
It's hard to keep everything straight.
I was the two little circles, Fololo
Um,
and Falala. Yeah. Well,
nice,
we
nice.
all,
Mhm.
there weren't that many of us doing everything.
It's
It
it's
was
really
a
true,
weird
man.
time.
Do you remember the episode of Kirby that showed them getting scripts on the day of recording and was kind of a big mock-up of the whole process?
Wait, so there's like a meta. Do you remember? Steve, you weren't a Kirby kid, were you? Do you remember this?
Are you talking about the episode where was it King DDD was making his own animated
Uh-huh.
show?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's classic.
Wow. Oh, we'll have to do a watch along of that episode. Yeah, any specific memories you have like that, please just shout them out because that is so much fun. So, wow, now that you said it, it's vaguely coming back to me. And I think Andrew Rannells was probably directing Kirby at that time.
Yeah, that seems. Yeah, I know he was on. There was so much going on. It's so hard to say, but yeah, that makes sense.
So most of your interaction was really just with the writers then?
It was. But I would end up in like an editing suite here and there, and like early on, I was kind of the gopher. When I first started off, I was like running
Oh,
running down to Beetlejuice to rotoscope, offensive images out of Pokemon episodes and things like that. So, but yeah, by and large, I was working with writers.
Did any of the like adaptation ever kind of fall into your hands, or was that all just the script writers? Like, I was curious if there was ever like a character or anything where you came up with a Americanized name for, or was that just you're just telling everyone?
Oh yeah,
this is
the
what's
names.
in Japanese. Yeah,
I think I was pretty young when I started this, right? So I think that the first season there was a point where I mentioned to either Norman at 4Kids or Gail Tilden at Nintendo or someone, oh yeah, when the names aren't in the style guide, I just make them up. And they said, what? So I tried to look a couple up, but I'm not sure how many made it through. But yeah, there were a couple of I also remember seeing a bill at Beetlejuice for rotoscoping Xanadu on this big like pleasure dome in an early episode, and I just thought that was a funny reference to the poem.
Wait a minute. Wait, go back. I'm confused about the Beetlejuice.
Oh, sorry. So Beetlejuice is just a post-production house that we use mostly. I mean, they did a lot of stuff, but
were you one of the first people, like when things would come up, were you also tasked with being like, oh no, this can't go on children's television, or was that someone else's job?
The only time that I was put in that position was with when 4Kids optioned or purchased whatever Kinnikuman or Ultimate Muscle. They were supposed to do the first season. They started with, I don't know, the second or the
like this. It was like the newer series, like
yes, exactly.
Like
so
the next generation show.
Exactly. Yeah. And they were I guess contractually obligated to air and add and adapt the original stuff. And we looked at it real quickly, and I was going to translate it, and the decision was made that not only was it not really marketable, but it was beyond inappropriate. I wouldn't even want to like. There's stuff that's not appropriate for kids, and there's stuff that's just inherently offensive. Maybe played differently many years ago or something. But so yeah, I kind of had to go through and write every instance of nudity or racism or whatever. So
that's news to me that the original Kinnikuman was part of the deal. I don't think I've ever heard anything about that. So
yeah, I had to kind of justify backing out of that, which
I know. I could think of like a few things from the original series. And I'm like, yeah, that wasn't, wouldn't fly today, and definitely wouldn't have flown back in 2002. So, and so like, yeah, you went from Pokemon, and then I'm curious how the jump felt going on to something like Yu-Gi-Oh! Because that's clearly a much more, still like a series for kids, but has a lot more darker tones to it. And
yeah. Well, anyway, I mean, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was in terms of it, the darkness for me, the one that was probably the most difficult to transition into was One Piece, which I only did for a couple of seasons, but there's just like some gut-wrenching stuff in there, and some deeply disturbing kind of psychic manipulation and trauma.
I could spend so much time picking your brain just on that. I mean, if you want to jump right to that.
Do it.
I mean, because One Piece, and I think this is going to be a question for people in acquisitions and all that, but I gotta know, what was going through your head when you were translating those scripts? Like, was there like a moment where you thought, how is this going to be on Saturday morning TV?
100%. Yeah. Just in those first, there's an instance where, it was always so like just deep, so like psychological pain. There are these, I think they were the guards for the King's Guards or something. And they do something where they sacrifice their lives, but are granted great power so they can defend the king. Yeah. And then whoever, this foe that's there, just kind of avoids them and watches them die, and then comes in. Like, that doesn't belong in a kid's show. Like, I feel disturbed.
And you said you were you doing it from the beginning? One Piece.
I was doing it from the beginning. That's not one that I stayed with as long. I think I stuck around for just a couple of seasons.
Yeah, because I mean, there's stuff like even like those early episodes, like there's child death, off screen, but
kids love that.
4Kids completely avoided that. So I was curious, like, if you worked on like that script at all. There's
so I do. The other really painful sequence that I can remember involved though, like a mother and a child, but the mother was sort of under the duress from this pirate captain, maybe crocodile looking dude or something. But again, it was one where I think she was trying to get freedom for her daughter or something. But every time she tried to get out from under this dude, he would, he'd get the best of her.
I think I know what you're talking about. I think it's a very, it's a pivotal moment early on in the series where pirates ransack a town and they pretty much take everyone hostage, and if you can't pay a certain amount of money, you're killed. And she only had a certain amount of money, so she paid for her daughter's lives and she sacrificed her life. Is that sounding familiar?
Probably. I mean, unfortunately I haven't revisited for a lot of years, but yeah, that sounds right.
And obviously that didn't happen in the 4Kids version,
right?
But I
did not record that.
No, but I'm very invested in knowing everything that went behind the production of that show. But I'm sure, and your translation at that point, it was still like was it like pretty much like a script, or was it?
So I would translate scripts for One Piece. And again, when it's like most of these properties early on, there might, there'd be a lot more meta and sort of cultural insight, or like WTF or whatever, for some of these One Piece moments. But as we go along, it revert to more of just kind of literally what's being said.
My question with One Piece is always, which I hopefully we'll get to ask somebody, how many episodes did they see before they acquired it? Like, is it before it took a turn? Because there must have been a line where they said, oh my gosh, what have we gotten into? Because it must have been expensive to redo so many of those scenes, not just the cuts, but, changing the actual animation.
Right. And I think that was one of those instances where sort of the production side of the house would often get hit with something, that maybe Al or somebody would sign a deal, and then it would be okay. All right, guys, we got 200 episodes here. And then you look at him and it's like, wow, this is a lot of work.
I tell people, because I get asked about One Piece a lot and I don't have the answers. And I say, well, what's great? Now there's 2 versions of One Piece. There's one you can show little kids, and there's one that the adults can watch. Because I've been yelled at for One Piece. And I'm like, I didn't do this.
You were hardly in
it. I was hardly in it. But I still do like that it exists, because if a kid sees their older sibling watching it and it's not appropriate, you can show them that other version and they can be perfectly safe watching that. So it exists if anyone needs it. We were told by Jim Malone, said when he worked on Shaman King, that was a production where he did have interaction with the Japanese team because that had to be more true to the original. Did you find that with certain productions over others?
So that was never a part of the process. Any of the processes that I was involved in. However, going to Japan around Pokemon, the team was always super enthusiastic about involving it. So I got to go to a few sessions.
Wow.
Kathy Borland and I went together. I don't know if you chatted her up, but and we got to see them do that live. And in fact, I wanted to pose this question to you because the Japanese approach and the US approach are very different. And I think watching so much of the work that we did in the US, like it was, I'd say it's probably a superior process. It's super efficient, and people are able to drop in whatever they want and, say their bid, and then it's all put together later. But there was this kind of unfortunate piece there too, particularly because I really loved all the voice actors in the US. You guys are great. We had, as often as, or infrequently as we'd interact, you guys were a lot of fun. And it felt like this missed opportunity because over in Japan, everybody comes and they do it all in real time. They watch the video and they all just do their parts in real time. And it was just this crazy production. And there's a kind of a level of interplay that, maybe it was accomplished in the US too in its own way, but it was, it's just a vastly different approach.
It's never the same as being in the same room as the other actors. We can work really hard to make it feel like that, but I don't know that we'll ever, because I also do animation in the US that's not just dubbed, where we work off of each other, and the improv and the stuff that comes out of that is really special. And again, I think anime is its own style, and dubbing work, it's its own style. So some of that might not work anyway in anime, but I'm fascinated by the fact that they dub to picture, because why wouldn't they record first and then animate to picture? That seems much harder. I always think of that first scene in the Robin Williams scene when he's dubbing what is it in Mrs. Doubtfire?
Yeah.
And he's dubbing something to picture, and I thought, and like he does a whole like 10-minute scene or whatever it is, and I'm like, it would never be that perfect. He'd have to stop like 10 times to get that right. So when you watch the Japanese actors do this, were there a million takes to get the lip flap to match, or?
Yeah. So yeah, from the couple of times that I got to view it, there were definitely do-overs, mostly like start the scene over or do that over, back it up. But it was close to like a let it rip, and then they would maybe do it again if they had to. And I made the mistake at one point of I believe it was director Morty, I think, and I just said, hey, I've always really respected how you don't really worry about the flap that much and just kind of let the right dialogue be there. And he was deeply offended. We worry about it. But from my observation, where 4Kids would be within a couple frames generally, right? Japan, there'd be some audio that didn't really line up, and that was just kind of okay.
I know I've heard some things about the Japanese side of things, not to stray off too much, but I think I've heard something. It could be like intense that, like, if you flub the line because they're doing it in real time, you got to let it go, and then you might have to stay behind afterwards and re-record that line. The show goes on. Like if someone messes up their line, they're like, "Oop, it's done. Keep going," because
you screw everyone else up.
Mm-hmm. It's crazy to think that that's how it's done, but even to this day, that's how it's done.
See, that probably wasn't on the tour for the American partners, but that would completely fit. Yeah,
that is so crazy. I'm sorry, my mind is still blown just thinking about the math that goes into that. So you're at 4Kids, you're writing scripts. How long did you stay at the company?
Well, I was there for a good while. I started, working. I guess I started there in 99, or the end of 98, I suppose, and stayed on for about a year, and then I started grad school at the University of Washington, and pretty promptly quit. I went to see a particular professor, and he had left right before I signed on. They had no department. So, I think I did a little work for Nintendo while I was there. They needed, Pokemon masters in training, I guess. And that wasn't working out. So I reached out back to 4Kids and ended up popping back out there that time for several years. I globetrotted a tiny bit while I was doing scripts here and there. I spent some time in Mexico and stuff, but for the most part, I was just there in New York until, I don't know, 03, 04 or something. I should know, but
that's okay. Were you given a bunch of episodes at a time, or was it usually just one at a time, like just so you understood the through line?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and usually I would have a bit of a library to work from. There were times I would just get one, and there were even times probably where that the story wasn't entirely clear from just what I had. But yeah, generally I had a lot of resources.
Yeah, I know with Pokemon, they didn't, like Michael Hagney didn't know which characters were even coming back. So he was, I think at that time it was piecemeal. And then as they acquired more shows, suddenly you had the luxury of the maybe 3 episodes at once, which it's crazy that that's a luxury.
Yeah, I think
that's how we worked.
It was. It felt, you could probably speak to this too, but it felt like, whereas at first, I think they really had to push hard to get Pokemon anywhere, because it was like, we don't want this stuff. We had a glut of it, in the 80s. You got this terrible Japanime stuff. We don't want it anymore. But once that got through, that there was just like so much appetite for everything that it was constantly like, how many seasons do you have? How many movies do you have? What can we make into a movie? That people wanted to see more and more suddenly.
You just made me really want to know more about the dubbing process before we had Pro Tools. Like I keep thinking about like a Speed Racer or something. Like how did they were they cutting tape and just, like literally with the razor blade must have been cutting tape and lining it up. Oh, that sounds so tedious. Sorry, that now I'm going to have a nightmare about that. Sorry, Steve, you were saying.
No, just talking about Pokemon and translating. I'm curious because notably the first movie, it was it is a lot, it has a lot more it's more of a psychological conflict in that original Japanese script. I'm curious if you ever wound up seeing the final English version, because apparently the two are stray very differently tonally. I'm curious if you had a reaction to that at all.
Yeah, so I did. I got to see that a couple of times, and those were kind of fun events for me too. I think I saw a premiere somewhere in London. I don't know where it was, and then I saw it at they did The Man as well, and I saw that, so that was kind of fun, and it was fun to see the movie twice on the big screen. A movie I've been involved with a little bit. Yeah, so yeah, I didn't have a really strong reaction. It was obviously I think they really dialed up the sentimentality, and I think that's something that people did a lot. And I think the
Mm-hmm.
audience was pretty happy with that, so I'm not like necessarily critical of it, but um, because I wasn't in love with that aspect of the original, and I mean, there are a lot of arcs and narratives in Pokemon that I just really love, but there's a lot of repetition too. So there's a lot of stuff where, as far as I'm concerned, they could do whatever they want because it kind of just had felt like more of the same
Yeah.
anyway. So, I mean, I thought a great answer. I wish I had
No, I
better.
was just curious if it was like, I was like, oh wow, they really just dropped this whole thing. But like as you said, like it was kind of like, yeah, this is business as usual, I guess. But
There was, so I had come from like a literature background, and that was my angle into Japanese as well. And so when I came over initially, that did have some conversations where I'd say, hey, there's some kind of cool cultural context here, or oh, hey, this is like actually kind of they're calling out to Kabuki a little bit with the way, or whatever. Um, and it's not that that wasn't welcome. It's just that it didn't matter, and we could have done an adaptation where that mattered. And I think it would have been superior, but like 30 dudes would have watched it, instead of a billion or however many people watched it the way that 4Kids adapted it. So yeah, I definitely, like, after a while I was like, okay, you do you.
Makes me want to see both versions, like the way with One Piece. Like now I'd love to see some of that stuff redubbed, just direct and, with no cuts and
Yeah, it would
yeah.
be pretty gripping, I think, honestly. Possibly a little damaging.
and you were mentioning some of the storylines that kind of stuck with you through Pokemon. I'm curious, if any come to
Hmm.
mind.
There is that three part in the first season with Team Rocket, which I thought was pretty great. I think it starts around kind of a Magikarp incident in the first one where
Oh, the
Ames gets conned into
SSN.
getting one. And they just
Yeah.
kind of they line that up comedically, I think, really well over that arc, to the point where, like, I was like watching it and just really cracking up. That
Mhm.
happened a couple of times probably in Pokemon, but not freak. Yeah, those three for me in Japanese were incredible, and I think they did a great job in English too. It was maybe it was a little bit different possibly, but it was, they took hilarity in one context and put it in another. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Are there certain types of characters that translate better? Like, I would have guessed that the comedic characters would not translate well, but it seems like that wasn't an issue.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that maybe there are kind of some common stereotypes. I don't know why I'm thinking of like Brock, but like the dude who's just always kind of going crazy over a couple girls or a certain type of girl or whatever. Maybe not the most progressive trope or anything, but that's, I think whatever culture you go to, they probably make jokes about that kind of guy. So I think
Right. The
there's
tropes exist for a reason.
Mhm.
Yeah.
right. Um, I don't know, for the most part, I don't think I ran into too many in terms of characters. I think that, and maybe part of it is like with Pokemon or some of these other shows, they're really aiming, it seems like, for kind of this like, um, everyman sort of very relatable, universal kind of, hero's journey or something along these lines that, I think the characters are really pretty readily understandable for most.
My mission with this
Mhm.
podcast, one of them, is to figure out who gave the American names to those first 150
That's funny.
Pokemon. I want to know, I really want to know what names didn't make the cut.
Mm.
Like, I want to know if, like, Squirtle was like water or something. Like, like, I want to know how the decisions were made. Did you have any interaction with that? Like, or did any of those names change as you were working on them, since the show is still kind of being developed for an American audience?
Yeah, so I think that the way the process works out the Game Boy game was adapted, and it was kind of in like pre-release before they even started adapting the TV show. And so when I started working on it, I was given a Bible of all of these terms. And, there were some, once in a while I'd run into like an attack or whatever, some kind of Pokemon, some dimension of the Pokemon universe that I didn't have an official word for, but in general, like it was all in there. So I'm guessing, I think the product manager was Gail Tilden. There was worked with a couple of guys I worked with, but I wouldn't know who actually, if it was a team or who did it. There's some clever stuff in there for sure.
I wonder if it was on the American side or the Japanese side. Like, that's what I've been trying to figure out, if it was someone who spoke English in Japan, or if the names got changed later once they acquired the license.
Yeah.
So we're going to dig into that. Since all of this was on paper, all this stuff you did, do you have any of this stuff from back in the day, or is it all gone?
It's possible, like at my folks' house or something, I might have some random old things, but I think it's more likely that everything's pretty well gone at this point.
See, your parents are going to have a garage sale one day, and someone's going to buy an original Pokemon script and make a lot of money on it.
I hope so. I hope they put it to good use.
So can we ask a little about what you did after your time at 4Kids, and maybe how some of your experiences there and your knowledge of Japanese and your skill set translated into work you did later?
Yeah. So after 4Kids, I ended up, I think I wanted to do something more serious or dignified or something. So I ended up in digital marketing for 10 to 15 years, basically kind of like tech bro adjacent. And, it was pretty painful, honestly. I was reasonably well compensated, but it was pretty painful. I don't recommend it.
You missed the cartoons.
Honestly, as you can attest, one thing that's great about 4Kids is there's just a lot of good human beings around. You might have a bad day, you might have a bad assignment, but there were some cool folks around to riff with. So,
were you actually did you have an office there? Or were you, I'm trying to picture the office and where you were there.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because I had like a corner office, which should be a flex, but it was like, mop closet size almost. I'm not complaining. I was very lucky, but it was not the biggest office. I told people I could see the flat iron from my window, but I had to lean out like 4 feet, You
would have fallen out the window if you really saw it. Have your Japanese skills come in handy throughout your life? That seems like such an amazing skill to have.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to get to do some pretty cool, to work with some really cool companies in Japan. I was at Adobe for a little bit when I started. I actually was at a little Utah company called Omniture, and then Adobe, and then I ended up at a company called Cognizant. And they sent me to Japan, and I got to work with some extremely cool people, and it was great to bust out the Japanese again, but I was not able to deliver quality work. It was very disappointing. It was no, Pokemon episode 22 or whatever it was.
Oh, man. Steve, do you have any final questions before we wrap it up?
I'm just curious if your time at 4Kids, if it's ever come up in conversation, has it ever gotten like an interesting reaction out of people, or has it just been, is this some of the first you've been bothered by this in quite some time?
It definitely, I wouldn't say it's followed me by any means. I probably met people who thought it was kind of coolish. There's a local band, steampunk band, Steam Powered Giraffe, and I bumped into them and they said, "Oh, well, hey, if you could translate a song for us," or something. So I, did a very small project for somebody to, in exchange for a ticket to a small show. That was enjoyable, but that's kind of a rarity, unfortunately. I mean, maybe I should make more noise about it or something.
No one's ever been like, you wrote the scripts or you translated the scripts for Pokemon and all that. Yeah,
my biggest
it seems like you've been outside of that circle for a very long time.
Yeah, I imagine some kid coming and screaming like, for the rice balls or something, and just like knocking me out or whatever. So it's like I don't want to know.
That's very funny. Michael Hagney is taking credit for the donut. Yeah. We have him on record taking credit for that, so you don't have to worry about it. You're free. But you're totally right about the people we worked with. I've forgotten so much about the shows themselves, and it's more about the humans and the funny incidents than it is about the actual show we were making. So I'm glad that you share that as well, because I wish I remembered a lot more. but I'm really grateful for the people I worked with there.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too.
Paul, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. This has been so interesting.
Yeah, thanks so much. The pleasure's all mine. Great to see you again. Great to meet you, Steve. Cheers.
It was so nice to talk to Paul. He's somebody who I didn't know back then. And again, it's just, I feel so uneducated about all the stuff that was going on behind the scenes at 4Kids. And it makes me want to have a time machine so I could have asked all these questions then. But what a cool insight into what was happening there with the localization and the translation.
Enlightening, yeah, because I think one of the biggest mysteries, or most of the questions a lot of people have about 4Kids is what the interaction was like with the Japanese side, because obviously a lot of these dubs have changed so much. And for me, my pursuit of finding more and more about the One Piece dub, we got a little bit of that in this interview, which I was happy to hear. Just knowing that people on the inside were like, yeah, how's this gonna fly?
Yeah, and we're recording this outro after the interview. I have since watched the Japanese technique of dubbing anime that Paul talks about, and my mind was blown. If you get a chance, just go to YouTube, Google and ask to see Japanese dubbing in Japan and anime dubbing, and it seems so much more difficult than the way we do things here. So kudos to them, man. They're awesome.
Yeah, it's almost like a double-edged sword. It's like, oh, you get to be in the room with a bunch of other people, but I think the stakes are way higher.
Yeah. Well, it also makes you realize that there's much more importance on performance in that than it is about getting the exact lip flap correct, because getting that perfectly in a group of people like that is much harder than the way we do it individually. And and for me, I always would rather concentrate on performance. So I'm envious of the way they work there, for sure. I'd love to try it one day. So there's a great video Connor does. His username on YouTube is at CDawgVA. It's CDAWGVA if you look for his page on YouTube. He does a great thing where he becomes a voice actor in Japan. All of his videos are awesome. He's a really talented guy. He's a British actor. So definitely check that out if you want to see what a session is like there. And hi, Connor.
Oh yeah, now you piqued my interest. I'll definitely look into that.
Yeah, check that
well.
out. Podcasty things, you know the drill. At 4Kids Flashback, the website, the merch, the Patreon. Yeah, you can get the Patreon. I don't think we said this earlier. You can get episodes early and ad-free. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I need another episode, you can get another one that is not available to the general public. You can be a patron of the arts. Look at you.
Yeah. As of now, it's just it's just a simple $5.
Yeah, and there's bonus content on there, some videos, and and if we're always happy to interview more people. If you were someone that worked at 4Kids, please hit us up. Also, if you're somebody who's a lawyer and really understands the legal ins and outs of the 4Kids lawsuits in the later years, and can explain them to us in a really dumbed down way, I guess, for my brain.
We're just a couple artists.
It's
not our forte.
Yeah, so I would love to speak to somebody who is an expert about that, or a business expert who can explain the company's ups and downs in a way that we can't. Please get in touch with us. Or if you're a great masseuse and you just want to give us free back rubs, we are open to that. If you make great tacos, mail them in. No, don't do that.
If you have a food truck, just drive it up to where we live.
That's right. Yeah.
We won't say where on the air, but
yeah. Thank God you're here to keep me in check with me mailing tacos. All right, guys, we will see you next week.
And we'll catch you next time.
4 4Kids Flashback is a production of Maji Media, hosted by Tara Sands and Steve Yurko.
Producers are Zach Logan, Tara Sands, and Steve Yurko.
For more information, go to 4kidsflashback.com. That is the number 4. And if you worked at 4Kids and have a story you want to share, please email us at 4kidsflashback@gmail.com.
You can find us on social media at 4Kids Flashback, and to listen early and ad-free, head to patreon.com/4kidsflashback. For podcast merchandise, find links on our website and Linktree.
As they say on every podcast, if you liked this show, please subscribe, rate, and review, and tell your friends, or 4. If you want to check out other Maji Media podcasts, go to Maji, M-A-J-I, .media. Thanks for listening.